Footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as a 7-year-old girl approached a house most grown men avoided. Inside sat a notorious Hell's Angel, oblivious to the folded piece of paper sliding into his rusty mailbox. It was a warning he ignored for 3 days. On day 4, everything changed. Thomas Hayes was not a man who expected good news in the mail. Known on the streets and within the deeply guarded Brotherhood of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club as Grinder, he was a 48-year-old veteran of the Vallejo Charter in Northern California. Grinder had spent 25 years wearing the famed red and white. His leather cut bore the iconic death head patch on the back, flanked by the top rocker reading Hellas Ains and the bottom rocker proudly displaying Vallejo on his chest. The coveted 1% diamond patch served as a stark reminder to outsiders he lived by a different set of rules. His house sat at the end of a quiet, dead-end street. It was a modest, single-story ranch heavily fortified with chain-link fencing, blackout curtains, and a state-of-the-art security camera system. The neighborhood knew better than to complain about the deafening roar of his custom Harley-Davidson Road King at 2 in the morning. They also knew to keep a wide berth from the towering, heavily tattooed man whose history was woven into the gritty, violent fabric of California's most infamous biker wars. To Grinder, the battered, rust-eaten mailbox at the edge of his driveway was nothing more than a receptacle for utility bills, junk mail, and the occasional court summons. He rarely checked it, and when he did, it was with a sneer of profound irritation. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon when the first note arrived. 7-year-old Lily Harrison lived 3 blocks away. She was a quiet, painfully thin girl who usually spent her afternoons riding a rusted tricycle up and down her own driveway, keeping her head down. But on this Tuesday, Lily was far from home. Her small hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled, sweat-stained piece of wide-ruled notebook paper. She kept looking over her shoulder, her wide, terrified eyes scanning the street for a specific, dark-colored sedan that had been haunting her neighborhood for weeks. Approaching Grinder's house felt like walking into the mouth of a dragon. The massive skull and wings insignia painted on the side of Grinder's garage seemed to glare down at her. She could hear the heavy, rhythmic thumping of classic rock echoing from inside the house. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Holding her breath, Lily darted forward, shoved the folded piece of paper through the rusted slot of the mailbox, and ran away as fast as her small legs could carry her. An hour later, Grinder stepped out onto his front porch. He was built like a cinder block, his arms covered in faded prison ink and freshly minted club tattoos. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the heavy afternoon air, and walked down the driveway to retrieve the mail. He pulled out a catalog for motorcycle parts, a final notice from the electric company, and a small, hastily folded square of lined paper. Grinder paused, his heady brow furrowing. He flipped the paper over. There was no stamp, no address, just the word "Please" scrawled on the outside in shaky, uneven pencil. For a brief second, curiosity flickered in the biker's cold eyes, but his mind was heavily occupied. The Vallejo Charter was currently embroiled in a high-stakes standoff. Rumors were swirling that the ATF had flipped an informant inside their inner circle. Tensions within the club were at a boiling point. Paranoia was the new currency. The chapter president, a ruthless man named Big Al Rossi, had put the entire club on lockdown. Nobody trusted anybody. Assuming the note was just garbage blown into the box, or a foolish prank by some local neighborhood kids daring each other to touch the Hells Angels property, Grinder didn't even bother unfolding it. He crumpled the paper in his massive fist and tossed it into the aluminum garbage can beside the garage. He had real problems to worry about. A piece of trash was the least of them. Wednesday arrived with a suffocating blanket of humidity. The tension within the club had only escalated overnight. Grinder had been up until dawn hosting an emergency church meeting, the mandatory, highly secretive gatherings of fully patched members. The air inside the house still reeked of stale beer, cheap cigars, and nervous sweat. At 3:15 p.m., Lily Harrison returned. This time she wasn't just scared, she was frantic. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she clutched a fresh piece of paper. She had watched Grinder toss her first warning away from her hiding spot behind the neighbor's overgrown hedges. She knew he hadn't read it. She knew he didn't understand the catastrophe that was quietly unspooling right under his nose. Lily crept up to the mailbox, her breathing shallow. She shoved the second note into the box, pushing it as far back as her little arm could reach, praying he would take it seriously this time. Just as she pulled her hand away, the heavy oak front door of Grinder's house swung open. "Hey!" a gruff voice barked. It wasn't Grinder. It was Dutch Miller, the chapter's volatile enforcer, stepping out onto the porch to spit a stream of tobacco juice. Dutch was a mountain of a man, with a thick, unkempt beard and a violent reputation that extended from Oakland all the way down to the San Bernardino-Burdu charters. Lily froze for a fraction of a second, letting out a sharp squeak of terror before bolting down the street. Dutch chuckled, shaking his head. "Damn neighborhood rats," he muttered as Grinder walked up behind him, wiping engine grease from his hands with a dirty rag. "What's out there?" Grinder asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Just some kid messing around your property," Dutch replied, adjusting the heavy leather cut over his shoulders. "Probably daring each other to steal your mail." Grinder grunted in annoyance. He walked down to the box. Inside, he found the second piece of folded notebook paper. This time, the word "urgent" was written on the outside, heavily underlined, the pencil pressing so hard into the paper that it had nearly torn through. Grinder stared at it. The paranoia that had been cultivated over decades of outlaw life began to prickle at the back of his neck. In his world, nothing was a coincidence. Rivals like the Mongols of the Vagos were known for using unconventional methods to send messages, scout properties, or map out hits. Was this a cartel warning, a scout marking his house? He unfolded the note halfway, seeing the messy, childish scrawl inside. "Just kids," he told himself, exhaling a frustrated breath. "Just stupid kids playing stupid games." His phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was a text from Big Al. "Fegs are moving. Lay low. Sweep the bikes." The urgency of the club's survival instantly eclipsed the childish note in his hand. Grinder shoved the half-opened paper into the back pocket of his greasy denim jeans, completely forgetting about it the moment he turned back toward his garage to tear his Harley apart, looking for tracking devices. By Thursday, the weather had broken. The oppressive heat gave way to a violent torrential downpour that turned the Vallejo streets into running rivers of mud and motor oil. The sky was a bruised, angry purple. Inside the house, the atmosphere was just as dark. Grinder hadn't slept in over 48 hours. He and Dutch had stripped 3 motorcycles down to the chassis, checking every wire and hollow tube for FBI bugs. They had found nothing, but the absence of evidence only fueled their deep-seated paranoia. If the feds weren't tracking the bikes, they were watching the house. If they weren't watching the house, there was a rat breathing their air, eating their food, sitting at their table. At 4 p.m., the rain was coming down in sheets. Lily Harrison was soaked to the bone, her thin sneakers squelched in the puddles as she marched down the street. Her frayed pink backpack offered no protection against the storm. She was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue, but her face was set in a mask of pure, desperate determination. She knew what was going to happen tonight. She had heard them talking in her living room, the men with the heavy boots, the men who had locked her mother in the basement. She knew they were waiting for the cover of darkness. Lily reached the rusted mailbox. Her hands were numb from the cold. She pulled a Ziploc bag from her backpack. Inside the plastic bag was the third note. She had written it in bright red marker this time, hoping the violent color would finally force the terrifying biker to pay attention. She opened the mailbox, slid the plastic bag inside, and slammed the metal door shut. The metallic siang echoed loudly through the rain. Inside the garage, Grinder's head snapped up. He had his .25 caliber 1911 pistol laid out on the workbench, running an oiled cloth over the barrel. His nerves were frayed to the breaking point. Every shadow looked like a tactical raid team, every sound like a battering ram. He snatched the gun, chambered around with a sharp metallic clack, and stalked toward the front door. He peered through the peephole, but the rain was too heavy to see anything clearly. Cursing under his breath, Grinder tucked the pistol into the waistband of his jeans at the small of his back, threw open the door, and stepped out into the deluge. The street was utterly empty. The only movement was the heavy rain bouncing off the asphalt. Grinder walked to the mailbox, water instantly soaking through his dark t-shirt. He yanked the door open. There, sitting starkly against the rusted bottom, was the Ziploc bag. The bright red ink bled through the paper, distorted by the plastic but clearly visible. Grinder snatched it out of the box. His jaw tightened in pure fury. He was a sergeant-at-arms for the Hells Angels. He had survived stabbings, highway shootouts, and federal indictments. He was not going to be intimidated by someone playing games with his mailbox. He didn't open the bag. Instead, he shoved it into the deep interior pocket of his heavy leather club vest, intending to bring it to church and have the club's intelligence guy, a tech-savvy member named Cypher, run the bag for prints. Someone was mocking him. Someone was probing his defenses. When Grinder found out who it was, he was going to break them in half. He marched back into the house, locking 3 deadbolts behind him. Friday morning, day 4. The storm had passed, leaving a bright, glaring sunrise in its wake. The house was quiet. Dutch had left around midnight to report back to Big Al. Grinder was finally alone. He sat at his cramped kitchen table, a steaming mug of black bitter coffee in his hands. Exhaustion pulled at the bags under his eyes. The adrenaline of the past 3 days was crashing, leaving him feeling hollowed out and older than his 48 years. He stood up to gather his laundry. He picked up his heavy leather coat from the back of the dining chair. As he hoisted the 20-pound vest, he felt a crinkle of plastic in the inner pocket. Grinder paused. He reached inside and pulled out the Ziploc bag from yesterday. The 3rd note. He stared at it for a long moment. The anger had burned out of him, replaced by a strange, creeping sense of dread. He set his coffee down. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his tactical folding knife. He sliced the top of the plastic bag open and carefully slid the piece of wide-ruled notebook paper out onto the wooden table. As he looked down at the bright red marker, a memory sparked. The 2nd note. Grinder walked over to the pair of greasy jeans he had thrown in the corner 2 days ago. He dug his hand into the back pocket and pulled out the crumpled 2nd note. He walked to the garbage can by the back door, dug through the dry paper waste at the top, and miraculously retrieved the first crumpled ball of paper he had discarded on Tuesday. He returned to the kitchen table. He flattened the 1st note. He flattened the 2nd note. Then he looked at the 3rd note, the one written in red. For the first time in 3 days, Thomas Grinder Hayes actually read the words. The handwriting was unmistakably a child's letters awkwardly sized, some written backward, the spelling entirely phonetic, but the message was brutally, undeniably clear. The 1st note read, Mr. Biker, the men with star badges are bad. They are at my house. The 2nd note read, Mr. Biker, you are gent. My stepdad is crying. The men said they will kill my mom if he doesn't do the job. Grinder's breath caught in his throat. His blood ran instantly cold, a physical chill washing over his heavily tattooed arms. He looked down at the final note, the red ink glaring up at him under the harsh kitchen lights. The 3rd note read, Mr. Biker, the men with star badges are fake cops. They are a rival club. I saw their tattoos. It is a snake. They made my stepdad put a bomb under your porch last night. Please don't start your motorcycle. Please save my mum. Grinder stopped breathing. A snake tattoo. The Vagos Motorcycle Club, the Green Nation. Bitter, blood-sworn rivals of the Hells Angels. And they had been under his house. Grinder slowly, meticulously lowered his eyes to the floorboards beneath his heavy combat boots. Right directly beneath the kitchen where he was sitting was the crawl space. And directly adjacent to the kitchen wall, separated by only an inch of drywall and a few studs, was his garage, where his Harley-Davidson was parked, where he had spent the last 2 days heavily scrubbing and aggressively stomping around. Please don't start your motorcycle. The little girl hadn't been playing a game. She hadn't been a scout for the feds. She was a hostage, She was collateral damage in a biker war she couldn't possibly understand, risking her life to stop an assassination. Grinder slowly stood up from the table, not making a sound, moving with the terrifying, calculated precision of a predator that has just realized it walked into a trap. He didn't reach for his keys, he didn't reach for the front door. He reached for his phone, and he reached for his gun. Day 4 had arrived, and the war had already begun. Grinder did not panic. Panic was a luxury dead men afforded themselves in their final seconds. Instead, decades of outlaw survival instincts took the wheel. He backed out of the kitchen with agonizing slowness, placing his boots exactly where he had stepped previously, hyper-aware of the floorboards groaning beneath his weight. He slipped out the back door and moved halfway across the muddy lawn before pulling out his encrypted burner phone. He hit a single speed dial number. "Yay!" Big Al Rossi's voice rasped on the other end, thick with sleep. "Al, it's Grinder. I need Breaker at my place. Now, no bikes, no noise. Bring him in through the back alley." "Feds?" Al asked, the sleep instantly vanishing from his tone. "Worse. Green Nation. They wired my house." 30 minutes later, a rusted plumbing van rolled silently to a stop behind Grinder's back fence. Out stepped Big Al Dutch and a wiry, scarred man named Breaker. Breaker was the Vallejo Charters demolitions and tech expert, an ex-combat engineer who had traded a military uniform for the red and white. Grinder met them at the fence, handing Big Al the 3 pieces of wide-ruled notebook paper. The club president, a massive man with a face like a worn catcher's mitt, read the childish scrawl in silence. His jaw tightened. "A 7-year-old girl dropped these off," Grinder said, his voice low and dangerous. "She lives 3 blocks down on Elm. They got her mother hostage, forced her stepdad to crawl under my porch last night." Breaker didn't wait for orders. He grabbed a flashlight, a set of mirrors, and a canvas tool bag, sliding on his belly into the dark, damp crawl space beneath Grinder's kitchen. The mud, the first thing she truly noticed in truling eternity. Grinder, Dutch, and Al stood in the muddy grass, hands hovering near the heavy pistols tucked into their waistbands, eyes scanning the perimeter. Finally, Breaker slithered backward out of the darkness. He was covered in mud and spider webs, but his hands held a pair of clipped wires. He looked up at Grinder, his face entirely devoid of color. They packed 3 pipe bombs with nails and ball bearings wired to a commercial blasting cap, Breaker whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. "They spliced the trigger directly into the remote receiver of your garage door. The second you hit the clicker to road or bike out, or the second you hit the ignition switch near that wall, the whole foundation would have vaporized. You wouldn't have known what hit you." Dutch let out a string of vicious curses, spitting tobacco juice into the grass. The Vagos, they didn't want to risk a direct drive-by and start a street war with the cops watching, so they outsourced the hit to a terrified civilian. Big Al looked down at the notes in his massive hand. The bright red letters spelling, "Please save my mom," seemed to burn in the morning light. The Hells Angels were outlaws. They sold contraband, they fought violently for their territory, and they lived entirely outside the law. But they had a code. You did not involve children, and you did not terrorize innocent mothers to get to a patched member. 3 blocks down, you said? Big Al asked, his voice dropping an octave, settling into a terrifying dead calm. "Yeah," Grinder replied, racking the slide of his .45 caliber 1911. The metallic clack echoed like a judge's gavel in the quiet backyard. "Let's go to church." The dark sedan was still parked in the driveway of the small, peeling blue house on Elm Street. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. 3 men wearing tactical vests over green t-shirts, the signature color of the Vagos Motorcycle Club, lounged in the living room. Fake police badges hung around their necks, a ruse used to gain entry the night before. In the corner of the room, Lily's mother, Sarah, sat tied to a dining chair, her face bruised and tear-streaked. Her husband, Arthur, was curled on the floor, nursing broken ribs. Little Lily was locked in the bathroom down the hall, trembling in the bathtub. The Vago leader, a heavily tattooed man named Rattlesnake, checked his watch. "You should have started that Harley by now," he muttered to his accomplices. "Go check the police scanner. See if Vallejo PD is reporting an explosion." Before the man could move, the front door of the house exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted hinges. Dutch came through the threshold like a runaway freight train, leveling a 12-gauge shotgun. Big Al followed, blocking the exit. But it was Grinder who moved with the speed and ferocity of a starved wolf. Rattlesnake reached for the pistol on the coffee table, but Grinder was already on him. The Hell's Angel drove his heavy combat boot into Rattlesnake's chest, sending the Vargo crashing through the glass table. The two other fake cops froze, staring down the barrel of Dutch's shotgun and the cold, unblinking eyes of Big Al Rossi. "Don't even twitch," Dutch growled, the hammer of the shotgun clicking back. Grinder hauled Rattlesnake off the floor by his throat, slamming him against the drywalls so hard the framed family photos rattled off their nails. Grinder pressed the hot barrel of his 1911 directly under Rattlesnake's chin. "You lost something under my house," Grinder whispered, his eyes entirely black with rage. The Vargo leader swallowed hard, realizing instantly that the meticulously planned assassination had backfired. The room fell into a heavy, terrifying silence, broken only by the muffled sobs of Sarah tied to the chair. Big Al pulled a hunting knife from his belt and quickly sliced her bindings, helping her up. Grinder looked down at Arthur, the stepdad, bleeding on the carpet. "Why you?" Grinder demanded, not taking his gun off Rattlesnake. "Why did they pick your house?" "Nah, Arthur coughed, spitting blood onto the carpet. A heavy twist of guilt washed over his face. I used to run with them," Arthur confessed, his voice shaking. 10 years ago, in Reno, I skimmed from their transport. I changed my name, moved here, tried to start a family. I thought I was a ghost, but they found me. They told me if I didn't plant the bomb under your house, they would kill Sarah and Lily and make it look like a murder-suicide." Grinder's jaw clenched. The pieces fell into place. The Vargos weren't just taking out a rival Hell's Angel. They were tying up a loose end, using a traitor to do their dirty work, so the Green Nation's hands looked clean. It was cowardly, and it almost worked. "Where is the kid?" Grinder barked. "Bathroom," Sarah cried, running down the hall. She unlocked the door, pulling a terrified, weeping Lily into her arms. Grinder handed Rattlesnake over to Dutch. "Take these three to the warehouse by the docks," Grinder ordered, his voice devoid of any mercy. "Cipher 'em, the boys will want to have a long conversation with them about club boundaries." Dutch grinned, shoving Rattlesnake toward the back door. The fate of the three Vagos was sealed the moment they stepped foot in Vallejo. Grinder walked over to the hallway. He holstered his weapon and knelt, his massive, imposing frame dropping down to eye level with the little girl. Lily was shaking, her face buried in her mother's shoulder. She peeped out, her wide eyes locking onto the giant tattooed biker she had been so afraid of just yesterday. Grinder reached into his pocket. He pulled out the 3 pieces of wide-ruled notebook paper. "You wrote these?" he asked gently, his gruff voice softening to a rumble. Lily slowly nodded. "You're a brave kid," Grinder said, pulling a small silver skull ring off his pinky finger. He held it out to her. "You saved my life, Lily, and in my club, debts are paid in full. Nobody is ever going to hurt your family again. You have my word. You have the word of the Vallejo Charter." Lily hesitated, then reached out with a tiny hand and took the heavy silver ring. Within an hour, the Hell's Angels had scrubbed the house of any evidence of the Vargos. Big Al handed Arthur an envelope stuffed with $20,000 in untraceable cash. It was relocation money. The Angels escorted the family's packed station wagon out of the city limits, ensuring they had safe passage to a new life, far away from the ghosts of Arthur's past. Grinder stood on his porch later that evening, watching the sunset bleed over the Vallejo skyline. The rusted mailbox at the end of the driveway stood empty. He lit a cigarette, taking a long drag. The world of an outlaw was built on violence, paranoia, and brotherhood. But as he looked down at the empty space on his pinky finger, Thomas Hayes knew that sometimes the greatest loyalty didn't come from a man wearing a three-piece patch. Sometimes it came from a 7-year-old girl with a pencil and the courage to knock on the devil's door. Did this intense story of unexpected bravery keep you on the edge of your seat? Sometimes heroes come in the smallest sizes and justice arrives on two wheels. If you love this real-life biker drama, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you next time.